liberty at Calvary. Good. Thank you. Go to class. Let's see. I'm not sure I have enough handouts. It ran out of paper as I grabbed it. I think we might have enough. If not, we'll have to get paper in that copier and see if. It's just one sheet, but it's a front and back, front and side, 2 pages. If you're just joining us, we have gotten a late start on live streaming. 7 people watching over here. And Bob Fletcher says hi. Shirley and Paul. Saw Paul at the store the other day. It was real good to see him. David and Perlin. Well, that'd be Perlin, of course. Sonia. Hello from the cheap seats, Rebecca Harmon says. Arlen and Sonia are watching. All right. And YouTube. Got 2 people on YouTube, so that's good. So this is week 4 of Answering Atheists. Let me get my mic on for you guys. Week 4 for Answering Atheists. We've already had our song and announcements. Thank you, David, for covering for that. Again, I'm using a book I've been going through called Answering, Is God Just a Human Invention? And 17 Other Questions Raised by New Atheists. And did everybody get one? Or do we need to get more paper in the copier? Everybody got one? You know what? I'll need one because I'm dependent on it too. All right. Everybody doing okay, by the way? All right. You ready for that sun to come out and stay out? Yeah. Yes. I heard some farmer today at Bob's Grill say 2 inches is what he's gotten total. And I know I'd like for some other things to be done in our garden. Mom and I were able to get out there last week sometime before this last rain and get onions in the ground, so that was good. Last week we looked at what's faith got to do with it. And we kind of looked through a definition of faith, and we kind of debunked a myth of how some people view faith. And we kind of made an argument for what biblical faith really is. And one of the things you'll note, and this is in the review portion of your sheet, biblical faith is not blind faith. We know that Hebrews 11:1 says faith is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Okay? That does not say that there's no evidence that can be seen. That does not call for blind faith, but in all subject matters, and this is that third bullet on the review part, everyone, including atheists, exhibits some form of faith. Remember some of the examples I gave last week? Generally, you don't get on a plane and ask to see the credentials of the pilot and get their flight records. You make some assumptions, don't you? Some of you are thinking, well, if I ever fly, I would. Some people don't fly. How many of you don't fly at all? Some people, has everybody here flown? Not flown the coop. I'm talking about flying a plane. Everybody here's flown a plane? That's pretty cool. You've been on a plane? How do you ride in a plane and not fly in it? I was not asking if anybody here has piloted a plane, although I've had my hands on the yoke a couple of times, but you've never flown? Oh, everybody here's flown? I'm proud of you guys. Y'all are a courageous bunch. Let me tell you. I have some people that I have asked, and they're like, no, you see, Jesus says, lo, I'm with you always. He didn't say anything about up there at 30,000 feet. Lo, I'm with you always, right? But atheists will do that. We'll get on a bus, assuming we're going to stay in between the lines, right? There's a lot of things we do that require faith. And even atheists will admit, yes, there are things that they believe in that you cannot see. And you might think, yeah, I know with the naked eye, but even without the without scientific ways of seeing things, there are things that they believe in that you cannot see. Wind is one of those. It's a perfect example of that. But I want to add these three scriptures to the host of scriptures I gave you last week. And by the way, apologies for those who were looking for this program last week, but the lightning fried our modem. Thank you. And we had to exchange it. And so we were dead in the water for 2 days without internet at all. So it wasn't our fault that we didn't have internet. But tonight, hopefully y'all are on and we're doing good. Okay. These are three scriptures I want to add to the host of scriptures we had last week that was in that handout. John 10, verse 38. Again, this is scripture. These are scriptures that emphasize the presence of evidence in our faith, in the faith process. By the way, faith is a process. It's not a switch you just turn on and off. There are occasions in which there can be an aha moment or a eureka effect, okay, where if you've ever studied the Bible with somebody, Barbara can attest to this, Melba can, others of you that have been with me studying with other people, Mom, when we have studied with those that are interested in being baptized, okay, sometimes through the study, there will be a moment that it's almost like you can see it, a light bulb comes on. How many of you have experienced that when you're studying with somebody? Whether it's about being baptized or maybe some other realization, you've studied with somebody, and maybe Rena, in school, in the classroom, when you're trying to teach your students something that's even secular or something like that, and you got that one or two students that after you've tried to explain it 2 or 3 times, they get it, and it's awesome to see, isn't it? But there's still a process involved. There's still prerequisites that lead up to that. That's just the pinnacle of they have turned the tide in their understanding of that. Now they're sold. They may not fully explain it yet or fully comprehend it yet, but it's like they've turned a corner. I imagine that's probably true in I was going to say farming, but y'all are turning corners all the time in farming. But I'm talking about when you're training a hired hand or trying to get something across to your kids you're raising up in this kind of farm life, and they finally get it. There's some things that I did just because Dad said do it this way, and I didn't comprehend it till maybe even years later. Boom! I now know why he had me do it that way. Because when I tried another way that I thought was better, it didn't work, or it didn't work as well, right? So we understand the process concept of faith, I hope. But here in John chapter 10, verse 38, and you tell me if there's a emphasis on proofs or not. John 10, verse 38 says, but if I do them, this is Jesus speaking, but if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the what? The works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father. Now he's referring to the claims of performing miracles and doing good works. He says, you may not believe me, and if you don't, then at least believe in what I'm doing, what you have seen me do. Is it true that even in the face of watching Jesus personally perform a miracle, I mean, being an actual eyewitness, is it true that there were some who saw a miracle that still refused to believe that he was who he said he was? That is true. That is true. Even in the face of seeing such a thing as a man with a withered hand whose hand came back to its full strength and capacity and size. But for some, all they could think about is, but he did it on the Sabbath. You remember that? They had that stuck in their craw, and they could not be objective enough that that guy's hand just healed. We call that blinders, don't we? And we see it in Mark 2, when in the crowded house, the paralytic, Jesus says to the paralytic, your son, your sins are forgiven. And people off the corner are thinking, not saying, but thinking, who is this guy who can forgive sins? That's blasphemy. Only God can forgive sins. And Jesus turns to them. They didn't say it. They thought it. He turns to them and says, why are you these things? And I would have gone like, did I say something out loud? Did I speak my mind? So how many of you have been guilty of thinking you were only thinking, but you actually were blurting things out and you forgot you were actually vocal and it got you in trouble? I can just see by the smirk on your faces, that's about 8 of you that have done that, okay? You spoke your mind. That gets us in trouble, doesn't it, when we start speaking our mind? We need to quit that. There are many other examples that in the face of miracles, for example, in John chapter 12, just the teachings of Jesus had convinced some very important Jews that Jesus was who he was, but they feared being excommunicated from the synagogue more, and they wouldn't follow Jesus based on their fear. So in the light of evidence, even, people can choose, even in light of the fact that they claim faith, they can still refuse to apply faith. Does that make sense? Okay. Here we have this verse saying that you need to believe the works. If you don't believe me, at least take a look at the Lord. Did you see what happened? Can you at least admit that something happened here? Another one. I'm just going to bring this up because I think it's remarkable that in John chapter 9, the blind man that gets healed to receive his sight, there's no denying that something happened. And when the Pharisees get wind of this, teachers of the law, they're questioning the guy. They go to the parents. They ask, is this your son? Yes, that's our son. Well, how's he able to see again? Yeah, we need an explanation for that. I would have been more like, wow, what an awesome thing to happen to your son who was born blind. And is this your son? Well, is this the real guy that was born blind that everybody sees at the gate every day? And their answer to them was, one thing we know, yes, that is our son. How he's able to see, we can't know. Ask him. He's of age. I mean, you need to be talking to him. We don't know how that happened. And then the stupid question, I know some people say there's no such thing as stupid questions. I beg to differ. That one's stupid. When they asked the blind man, who made you see again? Well, how in the world would he have known? He was blind. Have you ever thought about that? He was blind. And remember how he healed him? Mud, boom. And what did he have to do? Go to the pool and wash. He didn't see the guy that was talking to him. But they're asking a stupid question. Well, point him out. Who was it that told you this? I don't know. The one thing I do know, I was blind, but now what? See. Okay. Look at the works, Jesus said. Another one, Acts 1, verse 3. I love how Luke writes to Theophilus. This is volume 2 of his works or letters that he's giving to his friend. Luke, his gospel is addressed to Theophilus. And now he's going to talk about what happened after Jesus came, lived, died, resurrected, and ascended. And now what happened after what his followers did with that truth. And so in Acts 1, verse 3, and let me just back up to, let me just do verse 1. In my former book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and to teach until the day he was taken up to heaven, after giving instructions to the Holy Spirit to the apostles he had chosen. After his suffering, he presented himself to them and gave many what? Convincing proofs. You call that blind faith? I don't call that blind faith, do you? They'd been around Jesus enough to know that Jesus has set the precedent that he does remarkable things. When he heals, when he raises the dead, when he calms the storm, people's responses were not, we've seen that done 1,000 times before. Right? No, they said things like, we have never seen this before. And they said things like, even the wind and waves obey him. They had seen enough proof to put their faith in him. They gave many convincing proofs that he was what? This is again verse 3, Acts 1:3. That he was alive. Many convincing proofs that he was alive. I'm reminded of a story. Years ago, I heard this preacher tell this story, so it has to be true, right? It's a preacher telling the story. All preacher stories are true. Anyway, there was this guy on trial accused of having bit off a neighbor's ear. Didn't that actually happen? Mike Tyson, was it Mike Tyson? This wasn't that case, but this is further back. And so the judge is up there hearing the cases, hearing the arguments, and one of the witnesses was called up onto the stand, and the guy doing the questioning said, "Did you see so-and-so bite off so-and-so's ear?" And he said, "No." And so he says, "Okay, I'm done with this witness." And the judge let him down and off to the seat. And about the time the guy saying, "See, I rest my case," the guy could be heard going back to his chair, could be heard saying, "But I was there when he spit it out." Okay. There are people that knew and saw enough to know. One of the best evidences you could ever have is an eyewitness. Did you know that? And one of the best things you could invest in these days is cameras. Security cameras for your house, cameras even for your car. You realize everybody carrying a phone has a camera, right? It is not going to be uncommon that for any and everything, somebody's shooting a video or taking a picture. And it could be to your detriment, but it could also be to your benefit. Hopefully to your benefit, because there's not a lot to argue with visual evidence. But eyewitness is some of the best evidence you can possibly have. It can be your alibi and it can be your downfall. Witnesses. Okay. So Acts 2:22 is one more we'll look at real quick here. Acts 2:22. Peter in his sermon makes this statement, fellow Israelites, we're going to come back to this in a moment. Fellow Israelites, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know. That just went. Oh, you killed it. I mean, plug that. That'll make it go. That's noise. Well, y'all knew that. He says, a man accredited by God to you by miracles. What are miracles? Things you see. Wonders and signs. Those are synonymous to miracles. Not just stories, not fairy tales, but some of you stood there and saw him do these things. And we'll come back to this narrative in a moment toward the end of tonight's class, because I'm going to make a point about Peter's own witnessing. But that's the review. The additional scriptures I wanted to give up. You look at the title. There was a song in the 80s. I forget who it was. They blinded me with science. Y'all remember that song? I don't remember who the artist was. You remember the 80s? You grew up with your dad. Good music your dad had, and you share that. That's good. That's awesome. I like your dad. They blinded me with science. Or did they? And I'm making a play on that song title. That new atheists want to blind us with science. But it's not really science that they're trying to blind us. And when I say us, I'm including that Christians, Jews, even Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, any religion. New atheists are opposed to any religion, not just Christianity, okay? I'm not trying to put us in the same category as all other religions. I'm just saying that's the target of new atheists. All religious people are in that target, and they're very bold about it. They blinded us with science. At least that's what they're saying. But you'll see in a moment that they're really not. Are science and Christianity at odds? Now, I wrote that question, and I'm kind of at odds with that very grammar, but I'm using the title of one of the chapters that McDowell used. I think it's more accurate to say, is science and Christianity at odds? But he used it, are science and Christianity at odds? Any grammar people here? Is it are or is? What do you say, Superintendent? It's are? You're saying I'm wrong? Now, see, in my mind, I would think sciences, but yes. I'm wrong again, Paul. The book is right, and certainly Barbara is right. Okay, yes. So at least I typed it right. I stayed with the book. Are science and Christianity at odds? Okay. It is true that you can see conflict in the church as far back as the Dark Ages, and I'm talking about Copernicus and Galileo and some others that were a part of the Inquisition during those years, that they were brought to trial, and there are many things that they were trying to support or promote that went contrary to the accepted standards of the teachings of the church. Okay, and yes, there were times in which it seemed as though the church was opposed to science. However, enlightenment came in the 18th century, and it validated the place of acquiring knowledge through reasoning and evidence and testing and all that. This caused the church to relinquish further attempts to criminalize scientific endeavors. And of course, by that time, the Inquisition had been terminated. Most scientific pioneers, however, were theists. I had a list here I was going to go through just to give you a few. Copernicus, Robert Boyle. Has anybody ever heard of Isaac Newton? He was a theist. Blaise Pascal. Ever heard of him? Okay. Johannes Kepler. Louis Pasteur, the pasteurization process, right? Francis Bacon. What a name. Awesome name. I think so, yeah. Many of the early pioneering scientists were theists. Theists meant believers in God, okay, as opposed to atheists, not believers in God. Since I mentioned Galileo, let's look at something the book writes about that incident. That's your 5th bulleted item under that topic. You see, the rendition of the story kind of sets up some false assumptions about the whole incident. But this is where the idea of science and Christianity were at odds because of the reported cases. And most people believe that the Catholic Church persecuted Galileo for demonstrating that the earth revolves around the sun. Therefore, it undermined the unique and privileged status of our planet, threatening the intellectual security of the religious dictatorship of his time. The church's reaction to Galileo is viewed as routine. In other words, the thought was, no, everything revolves around the earth. We now know that's not true, right? We are revolving around our solar system's star closest to us, the sun. The problem with this rendition of the story is it's not true. Scientists before Copernicus and Galileo did not think of the center of the universe as the place of honor and privilege. Aristotle viewed the earth as a cosmic sump where air, water, fire, and matter mix to cause decay and death. In the Divine Comedy, Dante placed Satan's throne at the center of earth. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and other scientists saw the heliocentric model of the universe as exalting the status of the earth rather than denigrating it. Galileo's problem was not simply that he challenged the authority of the church. The issue was far more complex. Galileo was upset, or he upset secular professors as well as the church, whose careers were dedicated to the older cosmology. Think about this for a moment. If you saw the video, Is Genesis History? One of the points made in that video is that these Christian scientists that are arguing for a younger earth are stating that one of the big drawbacks or the one of big barriers as to people not being objective to consider a younger earth is because so much time and investment has already been put into academia and textbooks and schools of thought that it would be the undoing of many, many years of assumed processes. How many of you know that in the secular world, Darwinian evolution takes precedent over anything else, even though it's still the theory of evolution? Y'all know that? And to teach otherwise is illegal. You cannot teach creationism in the secular setting. Especially on college campuses, you'll find this to be very much the case. We've talked about this before. In other words, there's already a system in place. I would call it an establishment, even though you can't just identify one institution in this particular thing. It is a school of thought that involves publishing companies, colleges and universities, endowment funds, scholarships. Can you think of how much has to be dismantled if someone were to promote a counter or even just an alternative view of the origin of the species? Do you see how everything is interconnected? The whole thing would be at stake. The risks are so high. This is kind of what was happening here with Galileo. It says, the author goes on to say, he made 3 costly mistakes. First of all, he wasn't very diplomatic. He didn't know how to kind of reason with the people, and especially with the church. That first led to his reproof to begin with. He had broken his own promise not to teach what Copernicus had earlier taught that he was influenced by. He had made a vow that he wouldn't do that. But after seeing the evidence and being objective about the evidence for heliocentrism, in other words, Earth, not anything revolving around the Earth, but the Earth's actually revolving around the sun. That's what we're calling heliocentrism. Galileo agreed not to teach that. but he went back on his word. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two, he openly mocked the Pope. You don't do that. I mean, you could probably do it today and get away with it, but back then, how much influence did the Catholic papacy have in government? You know, you got to realize the nature and the climate of religion during his time frame. Third, he spoke authoritatively on the meaning of Scripture, which was clearly outside his field of expertise. An excellent scientist, a poor theologian, and misrepresented and misappropriated some of the Scriptures. And Catholics called him on the carpet for that because, believe it or not, at that time, they did have excellent expertise on the Scriptures. So those are three mistakes. He was not executed, by the way, nor was he ever persecuted by the church. He did have a trial, and he was placed in the care of an archbishop of Siena who housed him in his beautiful palace for 5 months. He was released to go to his home in Florence. He received a church pension for the rest of his life. He was able to continue his scientific research in areas unrelated to heliocentrism. That obviously didn't get promoted anymore. All this, I know this may sound like, oh, what's that got to do with any of this? This is where new atheists such as Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and some of the others that I've already told you about has said that Galileo is an excellent example because he tried to quote Scripture, made everything about, everything about what the church's stance and opinion of Galileo was all wrong. The author here says that, let me get to that quote. I swear that part of the page was. Oh, yeah. The myth persists because it's consistently presented as fact in textbook history programs and most recently in the writings of all the new atheists, but it's time to put it to rest. The Galileo incident is sadly misrepresented and is falsely promoting that we're at odds with science as a church. Okay. That probably wasn't all that helpful to you, but I thought it was interesting of what the author was saying. New atheists, this is the next bullet. New atheist in modern day science community has continued to misrepresent the present day's church's stance on science and promotes it through textbooks, history programs, and the writings of new atheists. Naturalism. We need to define naturalism. Naturalism is the belief that every event and feature of the world requires a natural explanation, and that any phenomena that appears to be unnatural is just a natural event that we don't understand yet, but it doesn't make it not natural. Does that make sense how I'm putting that? So everything can be explained naturally. If not now, later it will. That's what they're saying. Theism is the belief that holds there is a personal creator, a sustainer of the universe, who's omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, that's all-knowing, all-powerful, ever-present, okay? The creator initiated all natural processes. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and can pause, and can stop, and back up any laws of nature. Do we have any biblical stories about backing up laws of nature? The sun stood still. How about backing up the sun? Y'all remember that? Okay. Science is not to be confused with naturalism. Question: is Christianity, obviously theist, opposed to naturalism as a school of thought? I love nature. I'm out in nature a lot. I wish I would be out there more sometimes. We're not opposed to nature, but the belief system of naturalism is in direct opposition to Christianity as a theist belief system. We are not, however, in opposition with science. What's the difference in science and naturalism? Naturalism starts at the wrong point, or it starts at a point that misses or jumps over where it should start. It has assumptions. Assumptions are you're going to take some things for granted, and that'll save you maybe years and time and sweat and blood and maybe even money, so you can get to a point further down the line to start digging. And when you start digging and you start looking for the evidence for what you want to do, it's based on something you think you've skipped. Might save you time, but is it going to throw you off if you don't have the beginning right? If you're going to build a house, are you going to start with a roof? You can have the best engineered roof with every slope, every peak and valley meet, seamless, doesn't leak. But if you don't have a foundation and you don't have the partitions, the walls to hold it up, and it's not load bearing. How many of you have seen the video on YouTube of a house that's completely studded and the roof is framed? They've not sheeted it, but there's a video of it showing it starting to lean over, and I'm talking about every square inch of it has been studded, but it falls down. Have you seen that video? It's pretty cool to watch. I mean, it's not cool for the owners of that house to watch, but it's pretty cool for me to watch. They did not sheet it. They didn't brace it. They didn't do all the things that they need. It looked good, but it didn't stand up. Naturalism can't stand up because it doesn't have the right beginning. It starts with things that are biased. What's the bias of naturalism? Everything has to be naturally explained. What's our position if we're going to investigate something? Our position is what? Can everything be naturally explained? By the way, yeah? Have you heard of anybody who either themselves or they know of someone whom the doctor gave a prognosis of 6 months, and they go back for a checkup, maybe in 3, and the doctor says, I can't explain this, but you don't have cancer? Anybody heard of this or had somebody else heard of this? An elder in the church at Hennessy was given 1 year to live because of an inoperable brain tumor, Jim Bruner. And I went to preach there in 93, and I was there 12 years. This prognosis was given just within maybe 5 years prior to my arrival, late 80s probably, when he had the doctor tell him this. And it affected his hearing and his speech and his motor skills because of the pressures inside that brain. He's still alive today. I've seen him within this last year. I've reached out to him through Facebook. Given 1 year to live, and it's been 40-something years, 30 at least. Yes. Mm-hmm. That is awesome. And I happen to believe that God can still do miracles. I just don't purport that it's through my laying on of hands. But if we don't believe God can heal, why do we pray? You ever thought about that? Do y'all believe God can heal? If you don't, why are you praying? God, please heal whoever that is you got. I believe we have a God that still can part a Red Sea if he wanted to. Could still make the sun stand still if he wanted to. Could calm a storm. Science, by definition, has to be research-based and maintain a level of objective thought and reason. In other words, starts with no assumptions. But you might start with a theory, and then you have to prove whether that's right or wrong, or it's a direction that you start with. It does have a starting point, but it does not make assumptions. And it's not based on preconceived notions, okay, on the backside. And this always irritates me when the copier, I don't have it in the right mode. I got to flip it this way instead of this way, but there you go. Maybe that's what you like. I don't know. Are miracles possible? Richard Dawkins, a new atheist, wrote in a book, the 19th century is the last time when it was possible for an educated person to admit to believing in miracles like the virgin birth without embarrassment. And that all who do so, in other words, today and here in the 21st century, do you believe in the virgin birth? Dawkins says that should be embarrassing for you that you even believe such a thing. New atheists are unwilling to consider evidence for a miracle because such an event does not fit their preconceived worldview, because they are naturalists, but they say scientists. New atheists like to interpret probabilities with biases. I've got an example of this. Let's say that, let me get to the right page here, page 46. Let's say, for instance, Joe is a college student. Imagine that a study has shown 10% of college students surf. Given that information, what's the likelihood of Joe surfing? 1 in 10? What would you bet? What's the odds that he doesn't surf? That would be the safe bet, right? Of course, some people would have bet that Abilene Christian would have lost their first game in the bracket, right? But they didn't. There can be Cinderella story. What if I told you what information was withheld from you is that Joe, as a college student, happens to live in Hawaii? Does that change anything? Because in Hawaii, guess what? 90% of college students in Hawaii surf. Now, what do you think about Joe? What would you change your bet now about Joe? You wouldn't? I would. There's a 90% chance that Joe surfs. That's a better bet, isn't it? But if you're not given that information, how many of you know that any survey is subject to the information given surrounding it? And you can make any number out there represent what you want, and withholding and in keeping information from your target audience manipulates it. That's kind of what naturalism is doing, but science is based on facts. Where do you start your investigation? Okay, you can read the rest of that, but let's move on down because I got 10 minutes or 9. What are the facts? Now, these are not fully developed in tonight's lesson. This is to be given further consideration, but I definitely want to draw your attention to a wonderful work that's now been made into a movie. How many of you have heard of Lee Strobel? Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ, the author of The Case for Christ. Have you read it? Has anybody read it? Lee Strobel was a reporter, an investigative reporter. Now, a lot of the atheists that's converted to Christianity have been scientists like John Clayton and Patrick Mead and some of the others in the church that I've shared with y'all that started out being atheists and wanted to prove that God did not exist and ended up believing that he did because they actually found proof that he does exist. But Lee Strobel is one that actually was a reporter, not coming from a scientific, but as an investigator, came with all the information that he knew about on interrogating witnesses. And he visited theologians and rabbis and others. And he, through that process of trying to build his case against Christ, ended up building a case for Christ. That's true scientific research. Fact 1, Jesus died on the cross. Jesus died on the cross. Do you realize there are other witnesses besides the Christian movement witnesses that claim Jesus died on the cross? There are even religions outside of Christendom that attest to the man Jesus did actually, in fact, die on the cross. How good were the Romans at performing crucifixions? What do you think, Coach? They invented it. They wrote the book on it. What'd you say? Experts of it. That's right. They know if somebody's died or not. They do this, I don't know, maybe in a Roman soldier's lifetime, dozens, hundreds. I saw a picture of Jimmy and Norma just the other day posted on Facebook in the Roman Colosseum. I know that's not Jerusalem, but you know the history of the persecution of Christians there. We can't be too naive about that. As a matter of fact, I saw a lion behind you, Jim, in that picture that you probably weren't aware of that was crouched down and ready to pounce. Did you imagine that when you were in the center of that Roman Colosseum? And people in the stands were cheering for the lion and not you. You can picture that. That's a place I'd like to visit one of these days, but can you imagine that did exist, okay? Roman soldiers probably did thousands of crucifixions, and they were good at it. So good at it that they could determine from down on the ground whether or not a guy was dead. How would they do that? Just to make sure before they brought him down, and they definitely wanted to get him down before the Sabbath. And why would that be? Have y'all heard this before? The Sabbath is the day that no Jew's going to work, including carrying the dead out to where they wanted to take Jesus's body was Gehenna, which was the trash dump outside the city. That's when Joseph of Arimathea stood up and said, I've got a tomb for him, right? So in order to speed up the process, they were going around and doing what to the people on the crosses? Breaking their legs. What would that do? That prevented them from inhaling anymore. They couldn't do that. And after already severe fatigue and exhaustion, arm strength alone would not be enough. They would push up with their legs and pull up with their arms to get their lungs to expand and get more breath drawn in. That's the excruciating power of the cross. And they knew if somebody wasn't dead yet, they could speed up the process by doing that. Did they break Jesus's legs? No. Why? They would think that he's already dead. What did they do to confirm it? Punctured his side with a spear, and what came out? Blood and water. If he was still alive, would water have come out? Water is proof, and that's scientifically proven by medical professions, that water and blood coming out is proof of death. And he was dead. They knew how to kill a person. Who witnessed the death? Well, you got his followers. Now, I would say that some of the disciples, the apostles, they probably have all scattered, but we know John's there. John the apostle is there, along with Jesus's mother. We know that. We have, Mary, the mother. Oh, yeah, the others. And then you have probably some disciples who might have seen it from a distance, or at least they heard about it and they knew. I think Peter probably was convinced, whether he saw it actually happen or not, he was convinced because of his denial 3 times. He knew what he had done to Jesus. Judas was convinced that Jesus had died, right? Because it cost him his life. He took his own life because of what he had done. Fact 2, Jesus's tomb was empty. Again, this is shallow tonight. We're not digging deep, but just give you thought. Where did the disciples first go to proclaim that the tomb was empty? Where did they first go to proclaim Jesus has risen? Let me be more general than specific. Back to the town that they killed him. I want you to think about that. The first eyewitnesses and the testimonies given were in the same town that he was killed in. What do you think that is? If it's a story that they had made up, if, for example, what the Roman soldiers started telling people actually happened, or what they wanted to make people think happened, which was what? What did the Roman soldiers want people to think has happened? That they came in the night and that his body was stolen. That's fact 3, by the way, isn't it? Or no, that's still fact 2. How? We already asked the question, how are the Romans at killing people? How were the Romans at doing guard duty? Remember the Philippian jailer? And Philippi was a Roman colony, okay? Don't let that exempt him from being Roman. He knew what was required of him if his body was stolen. But these Roman soldiers said, well, his body was stolen.